Jen Briney is back to talk to us. She's host of the Congressional Dish podcast, which exposes corporate influence in the bills and laws passed by Congress. And we have to talk about the Department of Homeland Security and the recent funding or lack thereof kerfuffle. So explain to us, Jen, to start with, why the timing of this? Why did this debate over funding DHS come up now?
Well, the problem was never really with DHS funding. It was that the president in October of 2014 had issued some executive orders that basically allowed people that came here that were from other countries, people that came here as children, it allows them to stay. It doesn't make them legal. It's not amnesty, but it does allow them to not be deported for about 3 years. And so the Republicans got all mad about that. And so what they did is that instead of funding all of the government for 2015, they funded 11 out of the 12 sections of government, but didn't fund the Department of Homeland Security. They only funded the Department of Homeland Security for 3 months so that when they did fund it, they would be able to attach something that theoretically would stop that executive order. And the president would theoretically have to sign it, because if he didn't, then the Department of Homeland Security would shut down. So there was never any problem with the funding levels for the Department of Homeland Security. This was all about using that as a vehicle to get Obama to sign something that he didn't want to sign.
And we'll get into the specifics of that. And just to remind our audience, this is what we talked about. Remember the investigation we did, and that many progressive news outlets did, which uncovered that what President Obama did around those executive orders, first of all, in terms of the number of executive orders, even though Obama is kind of ad hominem attacked as overusing executive orders, has actually used fewer executive orders than almost every president in recent history. But in addition, even with regard to immigration, so many presidents dating back to Ronald Reagan had actually issued similar orders, specifically as far as immigration goes. So, Jen, this was another one of these attempts by the right to use something that is really not a huge deal to attack President Obama.
Yes, and I looked through the executive orders because it wasn't just the November 2014 executive orders that would have been theoretically defunded. It was actually 15 executive orders and memos that went back to 2011. And when I looked through them, they really read like, this is how we're going to enforce the law. And there are some challenges in court right now because it is possible that the way that the president said he was going to enforce this is a little bit further away from what the law intended, but that's for the judicial branch to work out. So
let's talk then about the what was really being attempted here with regard to I don't know if holding hostage of funding is the right term. I think the original executive orders presumably needed to be funded, but there was not actually money even set aside originally for those executive orders.
And there's the rub. It's one thing if you're going to defund something that has a pool of money set aside. That didn't exist here. So what the Tea Party did is they wrote a very poorly written piece of legislation that defunds enforcement of these 15 executive orders. Well, the problem with that is that what if the enforcement of these executive orders, if those processes are the same as enforcing something else? Would the Department of Homeland Security no longer be able to perform these actions if it overlapped? And so what would have happened if this became law is that the law would have actually become much less clear instead of this clarifying anything because there was nothing to defund.
It's incredible how we see year after year during the Obama presidency how money is held hostage by Republicans in a way that actually runs counter to their supposed platform and values. I mean, think back to a lot of the funding around war authorization and funding of troops overseas. And we had Republicans actually saying, we're really patriotic and we, support the troops and defend the country and kill the bad guys type of stuff. But at the same time, we're not really sure we can afford all of the equipment that the troops actually need to be as safe as possible, even though presumably it's the Republicans who are the party of security. And then again here, Department of Homeland Security, a department that many Republicans point to as doing the patriotic job of defending our nation, and they're willing to play politics with it to prevent President Obama from doing anything.
Well, you know what was really fascinating about this is that it wasn't the entire Republican Party. We were
Right.
talking about 50 crazy people in the House of Representatives specifically. And on the day that the department was inevitably funded, it was fascinating because the debate was an hour long. And instead of splitting it between 30 minutes for the Democrats and 30 minutes for the Republicans, they split it 20 for Democrats, 20 for Republicans, and 20 for Tea Party. And the Democrats just sat back and didn't use any of their time. But you had the Republicans that are really there for big business, but are smart and know how to, I don't want to say govern, but they're the business guys. They were telling the Tea Party guys that A, your strategy isn't going to work, and B, this is insane. This isn't going to defend the Constitution, as these Tea Party people kept saying. My impression of what the Tea Party people were doing is they wanted to attach something to the Department of Homeland Security. They really weren't all that concerned with what it was or if it was going to be effective. They were much more concerned about doing something to tell the president he did something wrong. It was very strange. But at the end of the day, Speaker Boehner, while it was late, he did allow this vote to come to the floor, and it did pass with Democrats and some Republicans. And to the speaker's credit, that was politically risky for him to do because he had to break the Hassert rule, which is that if all Republicans or the majority of Republicans don't agree to do something, then it won't even come to the floor. And he had to break this rule to get the department funded. So, we can't really say that it's all Republicans here. This was a small faction of the Republican Party.
Certainly. And I think the other interesting thing that's buried in there is that for a while I've been talking to different guests about whether they see the Republican Party as more fractured than united. And I've identified, and I'm not the only person who's identified these three factions of the Republican Party, the sort of libertarian Tea Party type wing, the evangelical and religious conservatives more focused on social issues, and then the more pro-business, low-tax types like Mitt Romney, for example. In some instances, those factions become pretty blurry when it comes to, well, listen, none of them are going to vote for a Democrat, right? So that's an example in which that fracturing is essentially irrelevant. Do you think that with budget issues, which is something you follow closely, the Republican fracturing is more relevant?
Actually, no, because this was never about the actual funding. What's happening is that people, we'll call them the crazy wing, because this is what happened in the 2013 shutdown too. The crazy wing of the Republican Party takes advantage of any situation where the president has to sign something where if he doesn't sign it, there are giant repercussions. So debt ceiling or any kind of government funding. They see that as a vehicle for getting things that Obama wouldn't sign alone signed into law.
And this is an age-old tactic, right?
I'm not sure, but I've never seen it done like it's been done in the last 4 years. I think this is new. I mean, I know things have been attached. That's the whole earmark controversy. But to come this close to shutdown so many times, this is new. This is more extreme than what we've seen in the past.
I think the belligerence with which they're willing to do anything to jeopardize President Obama's ability to carry forward his administration is definitely new. But broadly speaking, as you mentioned, the earmarking is something that's been going on, and the attachments have been going on for a long time.
As far as I know, forever. Yeah.
So going forward, what's the next step on this? Is this going to just come up again?
No, the Department of Homeland Security and the rest of the government is now funded until September 30th, which is the start of the next fiscal year. So that's when we can expect our next government funding crisis. We do have another crisis around the bend, though, when the debt ceiling is hit again in the next couple of months.
And is your sense that the September one is going to be closer to the next election in a way that is going to be more of a factor in what individuals are willing to do?
Actually, this is the one that scares me the most because it's not an election year. So the reason, this in 2013, that was not an election year. And that was the year we had the shutdown because they assumed that we would just forget about it, which apparently we did because we gave them not only the House, but the Senate. And so this year, I think if they're learning from history, I think they can get away with doing it again.
That may be, but remember that 2013 was the year before a midterm election, whereas September of 2015 is going to be just months before presidential primaries start. So you may be right that it is officially not an election year. At the same time, you may see presidential hopefuls who don't want to see their respective parties, whichever party it is they're members of, do the wrong thing with regard to how it's going to be attacked by the other side.
You know, I really hope that's the case, but I don't think we're talking about entirely rational people here.
That's fair.
So the people that are running for president, I mean, they tend to be in the smart wing, the people that were yelling at the Tea Party. So I'm a little nervous about September 30th this year.
All right, we are going to continue following it. Thanks to Jen Briney. Check out the Congressional Dish podcast for even more detailed analysis of all of these issues. Jen, thanks for being on again.
Thanks so much.